Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Please subscribe and hit the bell icon. He really threw a winner my way. One of Harrison Ford's biggest hits only happened because Kevin Costner couldn't do it. Kevin Costner must really like Harrison Ford, as he essentially gifted the actor one of his biggest hits with Air Force One. Costner and Ford were two of Hollywood's biggest stars during the 1990s, and between them fronted an almost embarrassing number of box office hits. Costner had JFK, Dances with Wolves, and The Bodyguard, while Ford had his Jack Ryan movies and The Fugitive. Given the similarities between the pair, it's a surprise they've never worked together, though Costner was kind enough to hand the script for Air Force One to Ford. This 1997 Wolfgang Petersen movie can be accurately summed up as Die Hard on Air Force One, where Ford's president James Marshall has to deal with a terrorist takeover of the titular plane. Air Force One became one of Harrison Ford's biggest box office hits outside of franchises like Indiana Jones or Star Wars, grossing over $315 million worldwide via Box Office Mojo. It's one of his most fondly remembered, too, thanks to a great supporting cast, including Gary Oldman as the villain, and great one-liners like, "Get off my plane." Prior to Ford getting cast in Air Force One, he was coming off the back of two duds: the 1995 remake of Sabrina and the troubled IRA drama The Devil's Own. Ford was in need of a hit, but despite the two men not knowing each other very well, Costner handed the screenplay to Air Force One to him. Costner was originally set to play Marshall, but when scheduling forced him out, he insisted Ford was the only one who could replace him. Says Ford, via Los Angeles Times. In hindsight, it would have been the wiser move for Costner to take Air Force One himself. Instead, he starred in and directed the post-apocalyptic drama The Postman. The movie bombing, alongside the perceived failure of his 1995 blockbuster Waterworld, saw Costner's leading man status fall into decline. Still, Costner was clearly more passionate about The Postman, and Ford ultimately felt like the better fit for Air Force One's lead. During his heyday, Ford had a talent for spotting scripts that would be both commercially appealing and give him great characters to play. This was true of Witness, The Fugitive, and Air Force One, which is one of the star's most purely entertaining films from the 1990s. It's more of a claustrophobic thriller than a slam-bang action movie, though its set pieces are also nail-biting when they arrive. Air Force One is also a prime example of the types of original, high-concept projects that used to get greenlit in Hollywood before franchises and IP largely took over the business. Air Force One is aided immensely by Petersen's suspenseful direction, who was no stranger to movies set in tight spaces after Das Boot, and he lets his actors cook. Ford also excelled at playing action leads who didn't feel invincible. He can kick ass when needed, but it's the circumstances that force Marshall into saving the day. Ford is also backed by a very game cast, including Glenn Close as his vice president, William H. Macy, and Jurgen Prochnow. The closest Ford has come to working with Kevin Costner is by fronting 1923, a prequel to Yellowstone. Costner hardly ever returned for sequels to his own movies, which made his 5-season run on Yellowstone his biggest franchise by default. The Taylor Sheridan-created series went from strength to strength each season and has been spun off into other shows like 1883. Given that Ford is playing a descendant of Costner's John Dutton, who is long dead by the time the latter was born, they don't get to share any scenes. Still, 1923 allowed Ford to front the kind of lavish, old-school Western that rarely get produced now. Sheridan has a large checkbook when it comes to his Yellowstone saga, so it's hardly surprising he can lure the likes of Ford or Helen Mirren to the project. Intriguingly, Air Force One might become a belated franchise for Ford too. There were reports in 2024 that Air Force Two was being developed, with Ford set to play a role in the project. If a sequel does come together, Maybe Ford should make sure Costner gets a role as a thank you for handing Air Force One to him on a plate. It appears Ford doesn't have any current movies in the pipeline following Captain America: Brave New World, which cast him as another POTUS. Ford is set to return for the upcoming third season of Shrinking, however. It's funny how fate, often cloaked in a missed phone call, a scheduling conflict, or a shrugging agent, can shape Hollywood history. One of Harrison Ford's most iconic roles didn't come from a boardroom pitch tailor-made for him, or a script written with his furrowed brow in mind. No, it came from Kevin Costner, indirectly. In the early 90s, Costner was Hollywood royalty. With Dances with Wolves behind him and The Bodyguard ahead, he could do no wrong. So when the script for Clear and Present Danger landed on desks, the adaptation of Tom Clancy's techno-thriller seemed like a no-brainer. Costner was initially attached, his all-American vibe a strong match for CIA analyst Jack Ryan. But there was one small wrinkle: he wanted to direct Waterworld. Kev was obsessed with Waterworld, a studio exec later recalled. It was his baby. He believed in the world, the concept, the execution. He was all in. So he bowed out of Clear and Present Danger to focus on what would become one of Hollywood's most notorious budget overflows. But Costner didn't just walk away, he passed the torch. In an interview years later, Ford reflected on the moment with a chuckle. "He really threw a winner my way," Ford said, half grinning in that gruff, modest way only he can. "I think he knew it. He had a gut feeling I'd be right for Jack Ryan, and I guess he was busy diving into the Pacific Ocean with Waterworld." Ford had already played Ryan once before in Patriot Games, but that film had inherited its own bit of Hollywood serendipity. Alec Baldwin had portrayed Ryan in The Hunt for Red October, but behind-the-scenes politics, contract disputes, and a rising Broadway schedule took him off the sequel. Enter Ford, stage left. "I was the older guy. Jack's a family man, a thinker. That appealed to me," Ford explained. "But more than anything, I liked that Jack wasn't a superhero. He was a smart guy in a suit, thrown into a very dangerous world. He had to use his head. That's fun to play." By the time Clear and Present Danger came along, Ford had become Ryan in the eyes of audiences. But this one was different. This wasn't just a spy thriller. It was political, sharp, layered. Ryan wasn't dodging bullets so much as navigating backdoor deals and bureaucratic betrayals. And Ford, with his signature mix of vulnerability and grit, played him beautifully. There's a particular scene, Ryan confronting corrupt politicians with a barely restrained snarl, that feels so quintessentially Ford. He doesn't yell, he doesn't punch, but he carries the weight of justice like a man who's had enough. Critics praised the film. Audiences came in droves. Clear and Present Danger earned over $200 million worldwide. It was smart, suspenseful, and timely. More than that, it sealed Ford's image as a thinking man's action hero, far from Han Solo's cocky charm or Indiana Jones' whip-cracking bravado. This was a man burdened by morality, and that made him magnetic. But what of Costner? Well, Waterworld became legend for all the wrong reasons. The swollen budget, endless production issues, and lukewarm reception made it one of the most talked-about flops of the decade. It eventually recouped its money, but the reputation stuck. Still, Ford never threw shade. "I admire Kevin," he said in a 2005 retrospective. "He took a risk. That's what this business is about. Sometimes they pan out, sometimes they don't. But the best stories, they usually begin with someone taking a step they weren't sure about." Behind the scenes, the relationship between Ford and Costner remained warm. They respected each other. They were two men in the same game, at different tables. Costner had thrown the dice on an ambitious sci-fi epic. Ford picked up a grounded political thriller and ran with it. Fans often wonder what Clear and Present Danger would have looked like with Costner in the lead. Would Jack Ryan have been more idealistic, more charming, Perhaps, but would it have worked? Would it have felt right? Hard to say, but history made the choice for us. And it's hard to imagine anyone else delivering that pivotal line, "I will not stand for this," with the same mix of quiet fury and clenched resolve as Ford. In a way, the story behind the casting is a Hollywood parable. One man's passion project opens the door for another's career-defining turn. And in this case, it was a win-win for storytelling, if not box office spreadsheets. Years later, Ford admitted the role had personal meaning for him. "Jack Ryan was closer to who I am than maybe any other character I've played," he said. "I liked that he was a reluctant hero. He didn't chase the action. It came to him. And when it did, he rose to it." That's Harrison Ford in a nutshell. Never flashy, always grounded. The guy who doesn't want the fight, but ends up winning it anyway.